So good morning again, and my apologies for all of you for having to see probably more of me than you would like. I'm going to talk about, as Justin said, a little bit more of a technical discussion this morning. The talk that I'm meant to give was essentially framed by Justin, who said, you know, we want to make sure that people understand what the World Health Organization is doing to help the drowning prevention community engage with drowning. Why don't you ensure everybody is aware of and understands what you did to develop the implementation guide? So the first part of my remarks will be about that, and then I'll end with a few details around work that we're moving forward with and some of the challenges that I see for the field ahead. So the implementation guide, I've seen the amazing Canadian volunteers have actually spent a good bit of time placing a copy of this on everybody's chair. We developed this with the support of Bloomberg Philanthropies, who had also provided support for the first ever WHO report dedicated exclusively to drowning, which many of you I think will be aware of, that we launched in 2014. That was launched by our Director General, as was the implementation guide. And where essentially we saw this as filling a needed role was fleshing out in quite a bit of practical detail the concrete guidance needed for anybody who wished to work on the implementation of the drowning prevention strategies that we first identified in the Global Report on Drowning. I want to make it very, very clear that in addition to thanking Bloomberg, I want to thank many of the people in this room, because every single thing that WHO has been able to contribute to the drowning prevention field has come from a collective effort. I've been amazed time and time again at the number of emails and requests for technical advice or guidance that I've put out to people who work in the drowning prevention field. And it's not been small requests, it's been things that require a substantial amount of people's time. They've always consistently come back to me with the guidance and the support that I needed. So thank you very much for all of you, because as much as these things being a reflection of what WHO is doing, they're very much a reflection of what the field is driving forward as well. So the primary target audience of the implementation guide are program managers, people like many of you who are engaged in the implementation, the direct implementation of drowning prevention programs in low and middle income countries. We did also, however, develop the text and frame the way we spoke about the issues in a way that we felt would also appeal to policymakers, people within government that can secure the political commitment and the political support for drowning prevention. It gives, as I've mentioned, concrete guidance on implementation of 6 of the drowning prevention interventions that we first identified in the Global Report on Drowning. And if you remember, we talked about 10 actions in the Global Report. We essentially sort of really looked much more closely at those and recognized that 4 of those actions were really implementation strategies that were cross-cutting in nature and would benefit all actions. And so we've sort of divided them like that. So as an example of that, one of the things is carrying out a full situational assessment before really embarking upon the implementation of a program, and we give quite detailed guidance about how to do that. This is a photograph of a social autopsy taking place in Bangladesh, where after the death of a child, there is actually a process whereby members of the affected village sit around and discuss the circumstances surrounding the death of a child. And what that often will lead to is a reflection within the community and a recognition that a number of the factors that led to the death of the child are factors that are amenable to change. There's many case case studies within the implementation guide. This is a case study looking at improvements in Mozambique following successive flood disasters. So the evidence that taking approaches to reduce disaster risk can actually save lives is made very, very clearly. So we tried to make this as practical as we can. Please understand that one of the challenges that we face at the global level when we're trying to do things like this that will be applicable to any or all of you who may be working in anywhere from Peru to Myanmar. It's difficult for us to, on the one hand, make this guidance practical and concrete, something that you can pick up and read and use, and also make it relevant to your setting. But to the extent possible, we've peppered it with as many case examples as we could. And those are just the 6 interventions that we discuss in detail in the implementation guide. Okay, now that's sort of the first part of my speech, and I'm going to change a gear and talk in the last part of my remarks around a few issues that arise. And one of them is I have had people come to me and say, David, you're always going on about drowning. But the only countries where you ever make reference to are Southeast Asia, Western Pacific, Bangladesh, etc. Is drowning really a global problem? And I refer people to this slide whenever they say that to me, because this graphic was something we developed for the Global Report on Drowning. I think we pulled the data for this in 2012, and it came out a couple years later. But essentially, we looked at all countries, looking at 1 to 14-year-old mortality patterns. And we wanted to see which are the countries where drowning would place within the top 5 causes of death. And every single country you can see on that graph that is in dark blue, for 1 to 14-year-olds, drowning is within the top 5 causes of death. Now there's a big swath of gray, and that happens to be the places where we most frequently talk about drowning prevention as being a pressing issue. And that's not even, the reason that it's gray is because we don't get sufficiently high quality data to work with that data at the World Health Organization. So anybody from any of these countries, please don't think the WHO doesn't think your country's important enough. It's just from your government, the WHO doesn't receive sufficiently detailed data to work with it. So the fact is, amongst the countries where we have the data, the suggestion is very strong that drowning is a problem. And then when you look at the more fragmented data, but the sort of the national survey data, it's also very, very clear that drowning is a leading killer in South Pacific and Southeast Asia and Western Pacific region. Another thing that we did in the Global Report on Drowning was we just took, we assembled a bit of a grab bag of the commonly understood killers of kids. So I don't have my glasses on, but I think this is TB, HIV, meningitis, and something else, measles. Almost forget about measles now. And we wanted to position drowning as a killer of children within those 5 causes. And we could show that it's not the leading killer of children in this age group, but it certainly places respectably within that group. But that data was actually pulled in 2012. And so when we did the implementation guide, I was interested just to see how things have changed. So here we are with our most recent estimates from the World Health Organization, which date from 2015, and were launched in 2017. That's always confusing for people, but just to make you all aware, the reason why we talk about 372,000 people drowning in 1 year and then 2 years later we talk about 360,000, it's not because we can't make up our mind, it's just that every 2 years WHO reiterates our disease, our global health estimates, and the numbers will always change somewhat. But in the most recent data, drowning relative to those 5 causes of death is actually the second leading cause of death in children between 1 and 14. Now, it's important to, I think, when we engage with people and we're communicating about drowning, to make sure they understand that although it's an important killer of children, and indeed here is another factoid that it's the 3rd leading cause of death in the entire world for people between 5 and 14, it's not only a killer of children. This is not only a child survival issue, and I think it would be a mistake for the drowning community to frame it as a child survival issue. The fragmented picture that we get from settings in Africa, if anybody who was at the Penang conference will remember this very well, Olive Kobasingi, who's here, gave a fantastic paper looking at drowning rates amongst fisher folk on the Great Lakes in Lake Victoria in Uganda. Extraordinarily high rates of drowning. But the important thing is, for me at least, is the demographic that was affected there was primarily young adult male. So we have to be aware that that's a very, very different aspect to engage with. Water transport events, migrant populations, I mentioned yesterday, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Dr. Lay and Tima Kurdi this morning about some of what's been going on in the Mediterranean. So we'll hear more about that, but those are issues as well that go well out of the child survival aspect, and of course flood-related disasters. Now, in order to move any issue in public health, you need to get political buy-in and capital. It can greatly accelerate the work that we do. And I think, as I also mentioned yesterday, we've done a good job at packaging and selling the issue as this is something which is vastly neglected relative to the public health impact, but preventable. Another argument that's quite effective, and I put this there because I know that at least some of you are often in discussions with ministry counterparts and people in government, but it's an important from the perspective of the prevention of drowning amongst children to ensure that your counterparts understand that they have put in a substantial investment into children. By the time a child survives to their first birthday, they've benefited from an extraordinary array of public health interventions, notably vaccine programs for vaccine-preventable illnesses, but there's a whole array of maternal and child health investments that have been made, and that's part of the bigger child survival revolution that started in the early 80s. So governments have been putting money into ensuring kids survive, and the most critical period for that survival is the first year of life. Once they get there to that period, their highest risk for dying subsequently in the next few years in many parts of the world will be drowning. So this is an issue that we can position as the opportunity of protecting on the investment that countries have made in their children. There's clear links with the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm not going to go into those, but just to make the point that any of you who are speaking with governments, they will all be quite attuned to what the Sustainable Development Goals asks them to achieve by 2030. So finally, I just want to say a few quick words about where we're going in the future. We are developing a number of best practice standards over the next 2 years. We're looking at improving and increasing our country-level programming. We're quite hopeful that we'll be able to do some large-scale data collection in a number of WHO regions, and we will continue to support policy development for drowning. The last slide I wanted to leave with you is just a couple of remarks around challenges for the field ahead. I think communications is an increasingly important issue for all of us. We do need to recognize and, in a sense, almost professionalize or professionalize to a greater degree some of our communication efforts around drowning. There are target audiences of the general public who need to hear certain messages, and we need to think about how we can make those more systematic. We do need to, I think, make continued progress with government, and it would be nice to, even though we have a number of important donors who are engaged and interested in the issue, to increase the donor base and get into some other potential areas of funding for the field. I think there's the great thing about this conference. I mean, I saw some presentations yesterday, and it was, as Justin mentioned, I mean, it's very impressive the quality that's being given. But this coordinated sharing of information and experience across all of us is a really critical part, and it's something that we need to ensure doesn't fall down. You know, we need to stay friends, and we need to stay connected with each other and exchanging. Finally, building the evidence base. There's a quality aspect to that and a quantity aspect. I think there's been a change for the better in terms of the professionalization and the quality of the scientific research that's going on in the drowning field, and we need more of that. And the final comment is there are opportunities for capacity building within the field. I think, as a general remark, the competencies that I've seen of younger people coming into the drowning prevention field over the last 6 years is increasing. There are other opportunities. I mean, one of the things I also coordinate for WHO is all of our capacity building work for the area of injury and violence prevention. And within that work, we do have a program called Mentor VIP, which is potentially interesting for junior injury prevention practitioners amongst you here. If you are working on a drowning prevention bit of work and you feel that you're a more junior researcher and you would like some direct sort of guidance from a more experienced, more experienced drowning prevention practitioner, apply to the Mentor VIP program. We open the applications for 3 months from mid-February on. It's a competitive application process. I'm not the one. There's a committee that helps me. We shortlist and select candidates. But it's a great opportunity to get a one-year mentorship with a more experienced mentor who can help guide you through your work. So please keep that in mind mid-February. Thank you very much.